Hey, how's it going, guys? First of all, I want to tell you I miss you guys so much. But anyway, I'm still doing my jury service, so I'm going to try to send you guys a couple of videos to see if that can help you out, as you're trying to study on your own. I'm sorry you guys have to go through this. Believe me, I don't want to go downtown every day. I'd rather be with you guys, but duty calls. Get it? Jury duty? Okay, all right. I know y'all miss my jokes. But anyway, let's go to chapter 11, key issue 4. I'm going to try to just go through the notes and I'm looking at the quiz as I'm going through here as well, trying to help you guys out. All right. Let's talk about the beginning, shall we? In the beginning, all the way up into 1970, most of the jobs that we seen, most of the industrial growth was in the U.S. And in Europe. But now this has changed a lot. Now over half of the jobs are presently in developing countries. Like we always say, just look at your clothes. You see India, China, Indonesia. A lot of these places, they are manufacturing all of our items, from our clothes to our phones to TVs, etc. The basic reason why is because of transnational corporations. The whole idea of transnational corporations, remember, pushed on by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, we wanted to open up borders so that the TNCs can use cheap, low skilled labor. If you look to the left, you see, who is that guy? The CEO, Tim Cook of Apple. Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple, and he's speaking to a lady, or at least taking a photo of a lady at the Foxconn plant. The reason why he's at that Foxconn plant because Foxconn actually puts together all of the iPhones. That's why on the back of your iPhone, if you want to check now, it says designed in California, but it is actually made in China, and Foxconn is the company that makes those parts or that puts everything together. Ironically, we argue a lot between different phone companies, but a lot of them get their products produced at the same factory. If you look on the right side, that's a little political cartoon. I just thought it was kind of funny because they had China growing, India growing, then the U.S. You got a guy asking for a loan. We do have these situations because we know that for our economy, we have a lot of people spending money that we don't have. That's a whole different conversation. Uh, but in China, India, the economy is growing. But we're gonna see that that might not always be the case. Remember, the big thing from the key takeaway is outsourcing. We outsource to other countries, and since we outsource to those other countries, they are now making manufacturing money. Now, when we outsource to those other countries, we have to be sure to pay attention to the facts because we still are headquarters to all of the jobs, the tertiary jobs, those service jobs, and those tertiary jobs. The tertiary jobs, that just mean we use information. All right, we provide services and information. Sometimes we refer to those tertiary jobs as coordinary jobs, but these are the jobs that takes college degrees, a well-educated, strong workforce. So those are still located in the core countries. That's why we are still considered the developed countries. All right, MDCs. That's the core area. You see up at the top of the triangle is U.S., Canada, Western Europe, Japan, because we have the strongest economies. That's where all the corporate headquarters, the Apple, the Amazons, the Netgears, the Toyotas, Nintendo, Sony. All right, in the semi-peripheral, that's Central Europe. Um, some will argue that the BRIC nations are the semi-periphery because those places now they're starting to develop and they're starting to have those intermediary branches. A lot of companies we really don't hear about in the U.S. because we got our own functions. Then the periphery, those the countries on the outside. Remember we were talking about the core versus the periphery model. In the periphery, those are the places where it's doing all the manufacturing. Those where all the outsourcing the jobs go. But these jobs are unskilled jobs. So yeah, they do make everything, but the problem is those unskilled jobs pay very low wages. And since those outsourced jobs pay low wages, we're still on the top of the pyramid. But it creates this international division of labor because then countries they say, well, we are specialized in doing such and such. So, for instance, China say we are specialized in putting the parts together, and then in Indonesia they say, well, we are specialized in making hard drives. Then you'll have America say, okay, we are specialized on developing good software. So we all have our different specializations. All right. Once we do that, that creates the international division of labor. So remember, the key term is the international division of labor is the selective transfer of some jobs from developed countries to developing countries, or um, when we have individual countries that specialize in certain parts of the labor force. Um, let's move on. Let's talk about, oh, I'm sorry, going back to vertical integration. I almost skipped over that. When we talk about vertical integration, in the past, we used to have companies that wanted to control everything. So when they control everything, they say they want part of the company. They have their manufacturers on the ground that's actually putting the things together. Then they had their management that was putting the ideas. Then sometimes they even have that same company have people out in the fields gathering up the elements. So famously was Carnegie, Andrew Carnegie, which was a steel tycoon, and he owned every single aspect. Everything was vertically integrated. So when we talk about the Mesabi Range in Minnesota, going down to Illinois, putting the steel together, he controlled parts of the cars. He had part of a trust with other companies, so to get the steel over to the East Coast. Then he sold it out to the manufacturers. That's vertical integration. So from the top to the bottom, you could all that's part of one country. I'm sorry, one company. When you talk about outsourcing, you might have one company that does all the design and everything, like Apple. But to put the stuff together, it'd be Foxconn. That's a totally different company that's doing the legwork. All right, got to speed up. When I talk about Apple, that's when I was showing you the Tim Cook using those other countries, other countries that have different companies that were making their things. So Maquiladoras translation is like a factory. All right, put the factory together, and those are factories that's right outside the border of America, going into Mexico. So the Maquiladoras is in Mexico, but it's right on the border with America. This way you have thousands of jobs located. Over 3,000 jobs was created since 1994. Even more than that now. Thousands of jobs was created in Mexico because basically, look at the bottom right corner. Businesses decided I can find very cheap labor if I could just go right across the border because Mexico would do it for cheap. The NAFTA was the North American Free Trade Agreement. All that did was saying that we were not going to charge a tariff on companies if they produce their goods in Mexico or in Canada. Canada has an educated workforce, so they missed out on that part. So Mexico is the one that benefit because they had a lot of cheap, unskilled labor. Now, in the past, when we were in class, I gave you a scenario how foreign countries they can produce those goods for cheaper, but then sometimes they have to pay a tax to compete with America. Then you gotta pay for shipping. When we talk about the shipping cost to get it on the ship to get over here, they get the train to get over here. If you are in Mexico, you're right there, so your location is awesome. So your situational factor is taken care of because you're located right outside the American market. So if you so Huffy can have a factory in Cleveland, then close that factory down, go to Mexico, and it's still the same amount of time to drive their bikes over to, well, I should ship their bikes over to California because they're on land already. We are connected by land, so it's very easy to ship goods, very cheap to ship goods. So now you got cheap labor and they're very close. Versus when I say Apple have a factory over in China, all right, so China has the cheap labor, but then you got to pay for the manufacturing costs. You got to pay for the shipping costs to get those goods back to America because you got to cross the ocean. The problem for Mexico is that they still can't compete with China because yeah, they get paid very cheaply. Look at the bottom left hand corner. You see all the women in there sewing up jeans. But by Mexico growing and by them being close to us, and they're able to get to America fairly easily, they it's kind of hard to find enough workers that's willing to work as cheap as the Chinese workers can work. That's a huge difference. I'm not about to go into politics, but the Chinese they can work much cheaper than uh, the Mexican workers. So the business owners they got to balance out the cost. Do I pay the maquiladoras a little more since I can save on shipping costs, or is the shipping cost still too shipping cost still cheap enough to justify me getting cheap Chinese labor? Uh, let's talk about the BRIC nations. BRIC nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China. I touched on this before. 3 of the 7 billion people live in these BRIC nations. Uh, Basically, almost 3 billion was in China and India alone. These nations had they were singled out because it seemed to be that they were the fastest growing nations in the world. That maybe one day that they will be the power nations of the world to take over those core countries. And they got specific things. Brazil and Russia, they have huge swaths of land that have lots and lots of natural resources, lots of coal, lots of potassium, lots of aluminum. So it's and all types of things that they have. So they got plenty of resources that they can use to develop. We know now, Brazil, for instance, they don't have to import oil. They already have enough, and they use biofuel. Russia has enough; they don't have to import, and that's the advantage that they have. That's what America was 100 years ago. We have lots and lots of fertile land that we was able to use. Now that our economy moved past that, you have these new nations that has things. And the benefit of Brazil, uh, they're warmer year round. So when you think of the agricultural market, they get a larger benefit. India and China, they just got a lot of people. So their number one resource is people. Uh, India, they have a lot of people that speak English primarily. So when we were talking about earlier with the outsourcing of customer service jobs and office jobs, that's gonna come, and we're gonna touch on that more next chapter. But that's coming from India. All right, you have a large labor force that also speaks English, so that helps a lot because English is the lingua franca. Lingua franca. China, the same thing. They have a very very large labor force, and they don't have individual rights that can kind of um, interfere with the labor force because when you think about the individual rights, that's when people are gonna demand more money. Despite that, as their uh, government is becoming more liberal, starting to allow some of these rights. If y'all look at this chart, to be honest, I just put this chart because I'm a hater, and they were talking about them overcoming us, so I just put that chart in there to show some of their problems that they are having, as if we don't have problems. But China is experiencing some youth rebellion, so it's going to be interesting to see what results in that. And last week, I believe, or the week before last, India was in the news because tensions was mounting between India and Pakistan. So you got to have a stable government if you want to rely on a good labor force. Because we saw like in Africa, these transnational corporations will not work in countries that are volatile because that can make them lose business. Let's talk about where we at. Regional ships. This is primarily talking about in America and Europe. So in MDCs. In America, if you look at this chart, it says right to work laws. Right to work laws. That's just saying that basically how they put it. They said, let me read it. It says law against compulsory union membership, a law that prevents membership in a labor union from being a condition of employment. So in Illinois, for the longest time, we was not a right to work state, we were something called a closed shop state. So that means if you had a strong union that was part of that job, if you got that job, you had to automatically join the union. And the reason why they had it like that in places like Illinois, like for instance, our school district at one point, was so that if every employee that works there is automatically in the union, that means the union has a strong force because if that union strikes, then they all strike. Or if that union demands to have higher wages, everybody get higher wages because then they're all on the same team. Now you can imagine if you're a business, that's not good for your business because if they all ask for more money, that means less money for you, or you're going to pass it on to your consumers, and that might mean they might buy less products from you. Now, I'm a big time union guy, but I have to be fair. So that's the reason why a lot of those places they moved to the South, because in the South you had a lot of poor people, and they were still poor from the Civil War. And as we know, the Northeast had all the manufacturing jobs, because remember, manufacturing jobs produce more money than the farming jobs that was in the South. All right, and then they were torn apart from the Civil War, so the people were really down and out. So a lot of those southern states said, "Hey, we will push to have laws against these unions so they can't force people to be part of the union." So then when they got to the interview, they said, "Hey, if you want a job, if you want us to open up a factory in your city, I need I need you to help me recruit workers that are willing to work without being in a union." Um, and they were successful at that. Because when you're poor, you saying, "Hey, look, I'm not gonna demand $20 an hour. Just give me something, because I just need a job." So places like Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, those places started to get jobs because those companies they said, "I can get America to, I mean, I can stay in America. I can be close to the markets, and I can get cheap labor from Americans, and I can still put a little stamp and say "Made in America." And this created the New South. So you start to hear people say the New South. Georgia was one of the first big ones. Texas, that's probably the fastest growing job market in America because of these right to work states. And they call it right to work, like you got the right to get a job. And that's all political talk because they're saying, it's the whole idea. If you try to start a union, then you're gonna lose jobs. Um, but you want the right to work. So like if you go against the union, then the rich people will create jobs for us so that we can have a job. Um, and it's taken. That map is growing, growing, growing. In Illinois, they did pass a law saying that even when it came to nationwide, you can't force people to be part of the union anymore. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works because we had a long history going back and forth with the union and labor, or the labor unions and the rich. Because usually what happens, um, America goes through cycles. They anti-union because they said the unions are too greedy, ask for too much money. We can't afford to pay them. And then uh, you'll get to a point where people start saying, well, the rich people are not paying us enough, so we need to start unions. And then the government start to favor unions again. So it goes back and forth. All right. But it did work for the New South right now, and that's the moment that we are in. And like I said, when you look at Riverdale, Harvey, Gary, Cleveland, you see these factories close down. That's the reason why. I know my family, most of my maternal family on my maternal side, my mom's side, they have moved to Atlanta to get jobs. All right, let's talk about oh, going back one more thing. Historic industrial regions, the Northeast, because that's gonna be on the quiz. We used to do it on the in the Northeast. And one more thing, the EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. They don't like places like us moving to the South. They also don't like the maquiladoras because usually those places, not only are they right to work places, they are usually places where they have less laws on pollution. So they might say, hey, you can open up your factory here. I don't care how much you pollute. And then, well, not that dramatic. I'm saying that for purposes. But those places, since they are softer on pollution, factories open up there because it's cheaper. They don't got to pay to to like make sure that they are putting less chemicals out in the environment. They don't have to pay to make sure that they are recycling well. They don't have to, pay their workers more. So all those things, it make those old places like the Northeast or the Midwest, like in Chicago, it make those people lose jobs. And then two, it make like the hippies mad, and they make the nature lovers mad because, or the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, they make them upset because now they're polluting their environment. And they're saying, is it worth global warming? Is global warming worth a job? Should we destroy our Earth so you can get jobs? All right, go down to interregional Europe. That's the next part when they say examples of regions: the convergence, competitive, and territorial. So the convergence reach. Oh, so one thing that's going to be on the quiz, I didn't kind of mark it on these notes. When they say example of region, put Europe next to it. When we talk about Europe, the difference between Europe and America, in Europe, well, specifically in the Eurozone, they actually encourage jobs to move to different regions. So in America, we was almost looking at it as a bad thing when the jobs moved south or when the jobs moved to Mexico. In Europe, they're saying that's a good thing because they wanted the rest of Europe to develop. Because remember, in the European Union, they wanted the Eastern Europe and Southern Europe to develop so they could make their economy strong. Especially during the Cold War, they wanted to be strong. All right, so let's talk about they broke up the regions of the Eurozone into three different regions: the convergence region, the competitive regions, and the territorial regions. The convergence region that's basically the poor region. That's the poor area. So that's Eastern Europe, Central Europe. Those are the places that was under Russian control at one point. Those so since they were under the Soviet Union control, we know communism doesn't work. Since they were under that control, they were very underdeveloped. So once they joined the European Union, those were the places where they're trying to push businesses there, trying to get companies to open up factories in East Europe so those Eastern Europeans can get a job. Uh, the competitive zones, those was the historic zones, the places that was already wealthy, France and Germany, the places that was already developed. All right, they're competitive because they can compete with the world market. The economy is already strong, so then, um, they're almost competing for jobs to stay because they already got the jobs. It's just a matter how strong the economy can maintain. The territorial zone is the places on the border that's next to port places. So, like if you're Greece, um, you're right next to Turkey, so that'd be a territorial zone when you have competitors in other regions. Uh, and that can be scary for those border nations because a company may relocate um, into, let's say, Turkey, take advantage of the cheap labor, and then have close. Well, they got to go around and about. But let's say Ukraine or Russia. Those places may have cheaper labor than places like in the Czech Republic or Slovakia. Uh, then the book goes into Spain's growth. Spain has been a success story for Europe because their economy grew strong since they reorganized. Uh, they got a strong auto industry. They make all like the cheaper European vehicles. A lot of European vehicles we hear about is like the luxury vehicles. Those usually German vehicles like the Audi, Mercedes Benz, um, the Volkswagen, things of that nature. Um, but right now they're second to Germany. And we talk about Central Europe. Um, Oh, they were just talking about the benefit. The benefit of East Europe or Central Europe is once again they are very, very close. On your notes sheet, it says East Europe versus Mexico. They both have cheap labor. They both have cheap labor that's very close. So once again, they're both land based, and since they're connected by land, it's cheap to ship the goods to the markets. So when it comes to Mexico, it's going to North America. I'm sorry, it's going to the United States. When it comes to East Europe, you're talking about going to like the Czech Republic, to Germany, to France, those areas, Austria. Um, when the difference between East Europe and Mexico, like I said, in East Europe is encouraging Mexico uh, I guess it was encouraged by NAFTA. Thanks a lot, Clinton. But it was also it's not as encouraged by personal businesses now. All right, shifting gears. Came a question: do you need skilled labor or unskilled labor? The whole idea of having unskilled labor is the Fordist approach. That's named after Henry Ford. Henry Ford basically, in the book he talked about, he said, I could take anybody off the street, give me an hour, I can make them a productive member. Basically, he said any dummy can do it. The Fordist approach, you just do one thing over and over again. You don't have to be skilled. All right, you just you take this cup, put a little glue on it, and stick it to this wall, and you do that forever and ever. 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. Um, that's the Fordist approach. It was good when we had tons of immigrants come into the country. Go open up a factory right in the city. Had those people come to the cheap immigrants. They come to the city. They get not cheap immigrants, but cheap labor through immigration. Uh, they was able to do a remedial task over and over again. Now that time has passed now because we're a developed country. Because those immigrants they sent their kids off to school. They got specialized degrees and everything. So now we on another level in the Rothschild's development model. Now we have the post-Fortis approach. The post-Fortis production is all about teams because everyone is college educated and respected. And we have machines that do that job. It's a machine that can grab a piece of material, put glue on it, and stick it to another piece of material. So that's why they call it the post-Fortis production. Um, just real quick, they got teams of production groups. So instead of saying, all right, you guys are the light you guys make light switches. So you just stick this little piece of plastic in here, make a switch. Now they have people say, okay, you guys are responsible for the automation of the vehicle, or something like that. I'm sorry, that was my Apple impression. That was pretty bad. Moving on, did we have problem solving team? Um, the whole idea in the past when people worked at factories, somebody did you wrong, you file a letter to the boss or you go complain to the manager, things of that nature. Now we got problem solving teams where people work together collaboratively because we're all respected individuals and we talk. Um, when there's issues, so like when Facebook had an issue of privacy, they had people to get together and say, how can we make the customer feel better about privacy versus just implementing a new product. Leveling, we are the same. Y'all probably heard the term white collar, blue collar workers. A blue collar worker was the person that worked in the factory that was on the floor that did their remedial tasks every day. So y'all talk about when y'all hear people refer to a blue collar worker, they're talking about the everyday American, the uneducated American, just the basic person that worked. It's almost derogatory. Now it's almost a compliment in politics because they say we're the real people. The white collar workers were the managers. Was the people they wore a white shirt. They had a white collar, so they like a regular white shirt with a tie. So they were considered the white collar workers. These are the ones that worked in the office. The post Fortis approach, everybody just dressed the same. You don't have to worry about calling people boss. I know even like with Mr. Varn, I'm old school, so I guess I'm kind of like a Fortis. I believe in levels. But when Mr. Varn came, he was just calling people by their first name, and he told people to just call him his first name. And like a lot of the adults, especially around my age, they like to just call people by their first name. Um, Old school people, my parents kind of raised me different, so we say Mister this, Mister that. If they a boss, and then if they a coworker, you might call your coworker by the first name. But the post Fortis approach is like we all are coworkers. We just have different responsibilities. Um, Productivity. Uh, the approach is if people feel like they're part of a team rather just an employee, they'll be much more productive because then they take ownership of their product. So if you ever watch the Apple press conference when they introduced the new phone, everybody's clapping. They got like 10, 20 different people presenting different parts or different products, and then they all clap like we work together. So then, even my mom, she'll come and she'll say, "Yeah, I was working with the client. We're introducing." She worked for AT&T, and they do. she designed like the numbers, like when you call American Idol and stuff. So she'll say, "Yeah, we built that American Idol product," and she used the word "we" like she was part of a team, versus just saying, "Yeah, yeah, I work for AT&T. This is what they did." You get it? The we versus they, and that's the whole approach, the we concept. And since we are all together, we all worked on this together. On Google, they call their people Googlers. They say we are all Googlers. If you look at the picture, those are a bunch of hipsters, the millennials at their job. You see, it's like a team. Nobody got a blue shirt or white shirt uniform. They all got their own clothes, individuals. They laying around, got their computers, and they're working on the project together, trying to figure out their approach. Uh, what is best used for? Usually, when you have educated people that work together, just doing different roles. Yeah, no, I was looking forward to this, right? Not. This got to go through this recycling stuff. Um, I don't know. Just write down what the book said about the recycling. Look, I'm about to cancel the video. Uh, Let me get to it. Don't judge me. Um, let's see what the book said about the recycling. You just do the basic definition for the quiz. Separation, collection, process, marketing, and reuse of unwanted material. Instead of just throwing it away, it just they said that recycling is better for the environment. It's more productive for the business. It actually does save money. Um, Remanufacturing is the rebuilding of a product to specifications of the original manufacturer product. Use a combination of reuse, repaired, and new parts. Uh, Companies more and more and more are recycling more, reproducing more, to the point where to the point where they feel like we can reverse this, or at least stop the whole process of destroying our environment. Um, you see, they got some facts out here about how much we have in recycling. Later, getting rid of the landfills. One thing I think it is responsible. I actually do recycle. I make fun a lot, but I actually do recycle a little bit. I don't go out my way go crazy, but I do recycle, and it's good that you guys are growing up to be more responsible. And I think that's good for that. Didn't sound too sincere, huh? When they talk about top recycling products, that should be in there. I think the quiz, do they say? You just need to know the definition. That's it. Yeah, that's good. Um, Remanufactured products, they talk about paper, plastic, aluminum, glass. It's a big fuss over those things, but a lot of that stuff get reused so much. You'd be hard pressed to have a plastic product that hasn't been recycled or remanufactured nowadays, because so many countries push that. The governments, they actually incentivize businesses to try to recycle and reuse. It's even some places, like I know in California, where people are exploring even reusing sewage water, so that we not destroying our freshwater intake. But all of these things is basically good for the environment, and it helps. Uh, I know Apple, they're 100% clean energy now in their at their headquarters and in their buildings. Even in the malls, I think they use recycled energy, so or clean energy, things of that nature. There a lot of products is made from totally recyclable products or biodegradable, and they always push that about how much of their products is biodegradable, and that's why we get money